Jake Dawson drove down the lonely Arizona highway, the late afternoon sun beating against his windshield like a furnace. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides, orange sand, scattered cacti, and distant mountains trembling in the heat haze. He had just finished teaching a free self-defense class for local teens, something he did every week to give back to the community he once ran from. As he passed an old, nearly abandoned gas station, he spotted a woman waving frantically. Her white cleaning uniform gleamed in the sunlight, and fear twisted across her face. When Jake pulled over, Maria rushed toward him, breathless and shaking. "Sir, please, something is moving inside the garbage bin," she said, gripping her mop handle as if it were a weapon. Jake's instincts immediately sharpened. Years of training had taught him to stay calm, to observe before reacting, yet something in her voice made him uneasy. He approached the bin slowly, listening for any sound. At first, he heard nothing, just the wind scraping against metal and the faint hum of desert insects. Then he heard a weak, muffled whimper. Jake lifted the bin lid carefully, prepared for anything, an injured animal, maybe a stray dog, but what he saw felt impossible. Curled up inside was a young Apache boy, no older than 7 or 8. His tiny body was thin as bone, his lips cracked, skin coated in dry dust. The boy's wide, dark eyes stared up at Jake with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Without hesitation, Jake reached in and gently pulled him out, feeling how weightless and fragile the child was, as if he might break from being held too tightly. Maria gasped when she saw the boy. Jake wrapped his jacket around the child, who trembled like a leaf despite the brutal heat. "Hey, buddy, you're safe now," Jake whispered, though he had no idea what danger the child had escaped. He carried him to his truck and sped toward the nearest rural clinic, miles away. The boy barely spoke, but his eyes never left Jake's face, watching him with a strange trust that Jake felt unprepared to hold. He pushed the truck faster, praying he wasn't too late. At the clinic, doctors rushed the boy inside. They determined he had been wandering the desert alone for nearly 4 days, surviving on nothing but a few drops of water and sheer instinct. His body was severely dehydrated, yet he fought to stay conscious, staring at Jake every time he entered the room. When the doctor asked for his name, the boy whispered only one word, soft, quiet, but filled with longing. "Home." Jake felt something tighten in his chest. He knelt beside the child and promised, "I'll help you find it." The boy blinked slowly, as if accepting the oath. While Jake waited outside the room, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He didn't understand how a child this young could end up alone in the desert. The clinic staff mentioned missing person reports, tribal lands, and the dangers of wildlife, but nothing explained the fear hidden behind the boy's silence. Jake paced the hallway, replaying the scene at the gas station. Something inside him whispered that this wasn't an accident. And yet he couldn't shake the strange feeling that fate had placed the child directly in his path for a reason he didn't yet understand. Driving home later, Jake realized that helping the boy wasn't just a promise. Something deeper had awakened inside him, a sense of responsibility he hadn't felt in years. The desert sky darkened to a deep purple as he thought about the child's whisper. Home, the word echoed in his mind, carrying a weight far greater than distance or geography. Little did Jake know, the moment he lifted the child out of the garbage bin, his life had shifted. Forces older than the desert itself had begun to move, and this rescue was only the beginning of something far greater than he could imagine. 2 days after discovering the child in the desert, Jake Dawson stood in his quiet kitchen, preparing a bowl of warm stew for the boy he now called Little Hawk. The child had barely spoken since arriving, but he ate slowly and watched Jake with curious, cautious eyes. The night was unusually still, even the desert wind seemed to be holding its breath. Jake moved around the kitchen, trying to ease the tension in his chest. Then he suddenly heard soft, rhythmic footsteps on his wooden porch, too measured to be an animal, too deliberate to be the wind. Jake wiped his hands and walked toward the door, the sound of each step echoing through the silent house. A strange heaviness filled the air. It was well past midnight, no visitor would come at such an hour without reason. When he opened the door, the sight before him made his breath catch in his throat. 3 Apache women stood in the pale moonlight, their silhouettes framed by the dark desert behind them. Their shawls glimmered softly with embroidered symbols, and their expressions carried a mixture of fear, gratitude, and something much older. The woman in the center stepped forward, her face illuminated by the faint porch light. Her eyes were deep and calm, almost ancient in their steadiness. You saved our boy, she said, her voice soft yet powerful, every word carrying weight. We have walked a long way to thank you. Before Jake could respond, Little Hawk darted past him, his tiny footsteps echoing with urgency. The boy ran toward the women with tears rising in his eyes. They opened their arms, embracing him with relief that came from the soul, not just the heart. Jake stepped back, giving them space, feeling unexpectedly emotional as he watched the reunion. For the first time in days, Little Hawk's face lit with life. The youngest of the women whispered something to him in Apache, and he pressed his face into her shawl. Jake felt like an outsider, yet strangely connected to the moment, as though he had stepped into a story that had started long before he ever came across that gas station. He cleared his throat lightly, unsure whether to speak or simply observe the silent flood of emotions unfolding before him. The eldest woman approached Jake with slow, deliberate steps. Her posture was straight despite her age, and her gaze was sharp, unwavering. When she stopped in front of him, she lifted her head, meeting his eyes with a depth that made his heartbeat quicken. There is more you must know, she said carefully. You did not just save a child. You have awakened an old promise. Jake felt confusion ripple through him, but before he could ask what she meant, she added, and that promise concerns your life too. Her words carried a weight that settled in his bones like cold water. A chill crept down Jake's spine, not from fear but from the strange certainty that the woman was telling the truth. The desert around them felt different now, as though unseen eyes were watching, as though the land itself had turned to listen. The moonlit sand stretched beyond the porch steps like a silent witness to ancient stories Jake had never known existed. He realized, standing there under the heavy night sky, that his life had shifted in ways he could not yet understand. The desert, vast and mysterious, was holding secrets, secrets he had never asked to uncover.